Welcome, everyone, to our first of two collaborative events between two nonprofits, Nyack ARTWALK and SuffrageForward. I'm Paulette Ross. I'm the creator and producer of Nyack ARTWALK and also the chair of SuffrageForward. And I'm joined this evening by our producer creator of this program, Clare Sheridan. Hi, Clare.
Hello. And
Michelle Latis, the daughter of Mariel Farlow. Hi, Michelle. And the talented artist herself, Mariel Farlow. Welcome. So audience, the first thing that you will see will be a video where we're exploring Mariel's creative process and the installation of the 20-foot concrete monolith, which is on the grounds of the Rockland County Courthouse in New City, New York. We'll also be examining the true meaning of this extraordinary sculpture and how it became a huge center for a political controversy in 1980. After the video, we will open up to the floor to a live Q&A, and we so encourage you for your participation and your questions and all of your answers and comments and anything that you would like to say or speak about regarding this sculpture. This program, for your information, is being recorded so that it can be streamed if you missed something, want to see it again, or want to recommend it to some of your friends. So just go to SuffrageForward.org and click on this program and stream away. So rather than me continue talking to all of you, why don't we just start the video and proceed with our program tonight. So Claire, why don't you take it away?
During the hot summer months of 1980, Mariel Farlow set out to install a monumental sculpture on the grounds of the Rockland County Courthouse in New City, New York. The effort was the culmination of months of preparation, proposals, designs, fabrication, creativity, hard work, and a bit of serendipity. Over the past 40 years, Being of Light, Image of the Human Soul, the hand-built, 20-foot-tall, welded steel and concrete monolith, has probably garnered the most controversy of any piece of public art in Rockland County history, to the detriment of Farlow's original intent. 2020 marked the 40th anniversary of the unveiling of this sculpture. We at the Historical Society of Rockland County thought it was time to revisit the sculpture, its creator, the controversy, and the lessons we might learn from it. This presentation will explore three aspects related to Mariel Farlow's sculpture, Being of Light, Image of the Human Soul, formerly known as Man of Light. Part 1, Serendipity, the artist, the sculpture, and her process. Part 2, Controversy, art meets politics in the late 1980s. Part 3, the epilogue. Part 1, Serendipity. In this first part of the program, we'll be hearing from Mariel Farlow herself, as well as from her nephew, Greg Wheeler.
It's funny how everything came together and fell into place as though it had been orchestrated. And not by me. But I often thought how when a person sets himself to a goal or a project, it's often amazing to notice how invisible forces or something seem to be controlling. Seemed to be making things happen. I've seen this in other people's lives, as well as in this case.
Mariel Farlow was born in Des Moines, Iowa, and grew up in Hobart, Indiana. Her parents, recognizing her unusual capabilities as a small child, modeling in sand, snow, and riverbank clay, enrolled her in the Saturday children's classes at the Art Institute of Chicago, where later she pursued training in sculpture. Her studies continued at Sculpture Center, New York City, and at Emerson College, United Kingdom. Farlow moved to Rockland County in 1977, and in that same year, her sculpture, El Deo Logos, was featured in the Seven Sculptors, Seven Sculptures of 1977 exhibition at the University of Maine, Augusta, along with the work of Louise Nevelson and 5 other New England sculptors. Ms. Farlow has taught art and sculpture. She has conducted seminars and workshops as a sculptor demonstrator, and her works are in many private collections. She has executed several special commissions for homes and gardens, and she continues to sculpt today. Farlow won an Arts Alive grant during the 1979-1980 funding period and set out to create a monumental piece of public art. The Arts Alive program was part of the Comprehensive Employment Training Act, CETA, a federally funded employment program for visual, performing, and literary artists during the late 1970s. CETA, or CETA, was the most extensive such program since the Works Progress Administration, WPA, of the 1930s, employing more than 10,000 artists nationally. Many participating artists and project administrators went on to successful careers in the arts after CETA funding cutbacks forced the termination of the project in 1980. Here in Rockland County, during the 1979 and 1980 program, 26 artists and art staff aides were chosen for employment. The artists were placed with community sponsors for whom they taught classes, led workshops, developed public artworks, gave musical and theatrical performances, and executed community documentation. In exchange, artists received a salary, benefits, and 1 day per week to work in their studio or on independent creative projects. 40 years later, only a few CETA public art projects remain in New York State. Mariel Farlow's sculpture is one of these remaining pieces.
September 29th, 1979 is a day I'll always remember. I was notified that I'd been selected to do that figure, that's monument.
After a juried selection process, Mariel Farlow was notified that her sculpture proposal was accepted. The date on which this took place was a particularly auspicious one, in her opinion, as it was the feast of Michaelmas. One of the special features of this particular grant was that the sculpture should be created in a way that the public could observe its construction. This was an important project for Farlow, as funding for other monumental projects had fallen through. Here are 2 examples of the miniature models created in preparation for the monumental sculpture.
I spent most of the winter months modeling figures to my heart's content. I ended with over 40, done in clay, wax, and plastiline. I was also doing a lot of research at the library and on the phone and visiting with professionals in the field of concrete building.
The next set of serendipitous circumstances for Farlow involved the Rafa Concrete Conduit Facility in Spring Valley and a nephew with a skill that was previously unknown to Mariel.
On my drives to and from the Green Meadow Waldorf School, where my 3 daughters were students, I passed an interesting yard full of great concrete structures. And there was one form, of which there were many replicas, that I thought might make a suitable base for my figure. So one day, I went over there and knocked on their door. And we had a great visit. And they had been telling me that they had just read The Agony and the Ecstasy of Michelangelo. They were ready to get involved with a local sculptor themselves.
So the evidence of serendipity throughout this project first started with Mariel finding out about the grant on Michaelmas. Then she stumbled upon a concrete conduit facility that could help her make her base. And then, unbeknownst to Mariel, her nephew had become a welder.
I was working as a welder during the summers in the Chicagoland area while going to school at the University of Wisconsin in Stevens Point. Mariel is my aunt, and she had been in contact with my parents, and she had been discussing her sculpture project with them. As a young man of 22, well, this certainly sounded like an adventure. It wasn't going to pay much, but that was fine. So I resigned from my summer job and headed to New York in my 1972 Chevy Nova.
By this time, Greg, my nephew from Illinois, offered himself to come and help do that necessary welding. What would I have done without him? So there's another instance of serendipity.
And here are a few more images of Greg Wheeler, who assisted Mariel with some of the welding.
The idea of taking this 12-inch model and scaling it up to 12 foot tall, that certainly was intriguing. As far as I can recall, back then, there was no computer imagery or AutoCAD to help us. This was going to be all longhand, as it were. A lot of elbow grease with some trial and error. Now, I was happy the base was going to be poured concrete, solid, constructed by someone else. The company that did that work was great. They helped us along the way, providing us workspace, the rebar we needed, a welder, and other equipment. Now, the picture of me standing in among the concrete bases that they produced there, this did remind us of Stonehenge or some Greek ruins or the Greek Colosseum. These were solid concrete. It was going to be a challenge then to get the rebar into the base before pouring the concrete and have it extend up high enough to weld the sculpture armature right onto it.
And as it turned out, their facility there was completely everything that was needed in order to weld the figure together, to make the metal armature that it needed. So this was amazing. To be able to work there, that we spent at least 5 weeks solidly doing the cutting of the rebars and welding them. The temperature started out at 91 or 2 in the morning. We worked from 10 a.m. till 4, solidly digging this 5x5 hole. But by the time we ended at 4 in the afternoon, it was 102 degrees.
I'll never forget that day. And we were so happy that that went well. We didn't hit any boulders or bedrock, which would have been a big problem.
After digging the hole, now we had to bring over the great big base. It's 8 foot tall and 4 foot square on the bottom part and 2 foot square on the upper part. It had been recast. The ones that were in the yard couldn't be used because it had to be recast with the rebars very carefully placed in it that would correspond to the bottom of the sculpture armature, and they would then be welded together. Now this needed to be brought over. They had this very powerful truck, but it strained it. I could really see that. Whew. Getting it set in place exactly level and everything. They worked it out. Yeah, those Rafas were helpful again.
Mariel and I had to rent a portable welder, which we located about an hour away from the site. Now again, the concrete company assisted us with their crane so we could get the armature welded on straight and plumb, and of course that was critical.
At this point, Greg had to return home to earn some proper money with his welding. And the job on site began to be rather tedious in the end and boring in itself. But the intent was now to create a very taut skin all around the armature into which to press the cement later on so that we would have a hollow figure up there. In order to have this taut surrounding skin of metal, I now had to layer up sheets of overlapping metal lath and hardware cloth and to wire tie these layers together in such a way that only a sharp pencil point might penetrate the skin, but not the full round of an ordinary pencil. By this time, I've been thinking about that sculpture, and I had planned for it to be in ferro cement. But now I'm having second thoughts because I'm thinking about how extreme heat, extreme ice, and these things can have deleterious effects. I felt that as a sculpture that just stands there, hollow, and with possible, I could just see that cracks could happen and it could need repairs. But here it stands now, 40 years, no repairs needed. And you know why? It's because I decided at the end to pour it solid. Nevertheless, this part of the process also proved wonderful in its own right, since so many people came by wondering what I'm making. And I tell them it's my imaginative expression of the human soul as the person takes stock of himself, as though going before a judge in court. But fortunately, during this time, there were many visitors. They would frequently be coming up to ask, "What you doing?" And with that, I was able to be more precise about what it all was about. Before that, I think I had a general feeling for it, but then as that figure loomed there with such powerful position facing each of the 4 directions, I felt there's a different feeling in connection with each direction, and this sculpture really can express that. And in fact, I then worked on a poem that also expressed that.
Being of Light was unveiled on October 9, 1980, at an event led by Anne O'Sullivan of the Arts Council of Rockland. Farlow provided some thoughts on the sculpture, and guests enjoyed readings from special guests, Bernadine Jocelyn, a noted author, and Brad Riley, an actor, director. As a member of the threefold community, Farlow included a quotation from Rudolf Steiner on the cover of the event program. "If you would know yourself, look out into the cosmic spaces. If you would fathom the cosmic spaces, look inwards into your own self." Rudolf Steiner. As Mariel Farlow completed her monumental sculpture during the summer of 1980, she wrote a poem to accompany it. It was her hope that this poem and an artist's statement could be affixed to the base of the sculpture. Sadly, the CETA Arts Alive funding ran out before this was accomplished. Part 2, Controversy. Art Meets Politics in the late 1980s. In April 1986, 6 years after the unveiling of Mariel Farlow's sculpture, newspapers reported that a group of local parents had formed Parents for Decency Through Law in order to prevent a Nanuet Mall novelty store called Happy Times from displaying greeting cards featuring rear nudity. Bonnie Walsh of Clarkstown led the Parents for Decency Through Law effort. The group gained enough momentum to convince legislator Philip Bosco to put forth legislation to prevent any indecency from public display. Bosco's proposal inspired extensive debate among the Rockland County legislators. Divided into two camps, some legislators felt a county law was needed to protect children, while others argued such a law amounted to censorship. For some legislators, including Ramapo Democrat Stanley Dworkin, the proposed law held serious constitutional defects. Quote, "Everybody in this room is against pornography," unquote, he said. Quote, "But as a lawmaker, I seriously question this law's constitutionality," unquote. Despite the disagreements, in December 1986, County Executive John T. Grant signed the bill into law. Even though County Executive Grant explicitly stated that the law was only meant to prevent children from viewing what they could not purchase, by June of 1987, legislator Bosco had decided to use the hot-button issue of decency as a way to ignite interest in his new campaign to become supervisor of the town of Clarkstown. Bosco added Mariel Farlow's sculpture to his indecent list, calling the sculpture obscene. On August 24, 1987, the Journal News reported, Bosco has spearheaded a movement to have the modernist sculpture moved from the courthouse lawn to Rockland Community College in Viola, saying it is inappropriate for a structure the county hopes to have declared a national landmark. He said many county residents consider the sculpture obscene, adding that it is being viewed as a representation of female genitalia. Bosco attributed the unwillingness of some county officials to move the sculpture to, quote, certain liberal elements, unquote, sweeping the county and the nation, saying, quote, the problem with liberal thinking is that they think everything is okay, unquote. Upon hearing of the fracas, Farlow responded strongly, saying, quote, the sculpture embodies the principles of justice, courage, and strength. Farlow went on to say that there was no place more appropriate for it than the courthouse lawn. She stated, the fact that it could be misconstrued and judged as an obscene or inappropriate work for the county courthouse reflects the limitations of those who are seeing it as such. She went on to say that it was not intended to resemble female genitalia. but to imaginatively represent the human soul. In a letter to the editor of the Journal News, Sam Pepperman of Pomona wrote in support of keeping the sculpture in place. He said, "I suppose we will always have small-minded politicians trying to build a small-minded constituency. I am glad to see that County Legislator Philip Bosco's fellow legislators do not support him. If he sees genitalia everywhere he looks, I offer to paint fig leaves on his glasses." The push for the removal of Mariel Farlow's sculpture came to a head on August 27, 1987. As the debate over the fate of Farlow's sculpture was to begin at the Allison Paris County Office Building, a downed power line caused the lights to go out. When the emergency generator restored the lights, all went on except those in the conference room. So the lawmakers made their way to an employee lounge to continue the meeting. Just as Bosco launched into a speech on the proposal for removal of the sculpture, the lights went out a second time. Maintenance workers could not determine the cause of the second outage, so the meeting was adjourned, quote, due to an act of God. And the topic of moving the sculpture was not taken up again. It's interesting to note that Bonnie Walsh, who had helped convince Rockland lawmakers to adopt a law banning the open display of explicit materials, said that the sculpture on the courthouse lawn wasn't obscene in her opinion. It's at this time that I think it's important to discuss the misinterpretation of art. In the art world, nothing hurts a career or bruises an ego like a misinterpreted artwork. That's why it's such a shame that hundreds of years after their conception and creation, some of the world's most renowned artistic pieces are still frequently misinterpreted or misunderstood. From Fragonard's The Swing to Hopper's Nighthawks, artworks and the artists who create them have been misinterpreted for generations. By examining non-aesthetic intent, working motivations, biographical or historical context, and cases in which an announced intent drives aesthetic transformation, we believe that while its specific value varies from case to case, aesthetic intent is a key part of our cumulative experience of art. Georgia O'Keeffe, a giant of American 20th century modernism, has been labeled with similar conservative, male, and widely accepted assumptions that her famous flower paintings are depictions of female genitalia. Many of the white male artists across the 20th century have the privilege of being read on multiple levels, says Achim Borchardt Kuhn of Tate Modern Museum. While others, be they women or artists from other parts of the world, tend to be reduced to one conservative reading. It's high time that galleries and museums change this. Tanya Barson, who curated the Tate Modern Georgia O'Keeffe retrospective in 2016, emphasized how much O'Keeffe had resisted the sexual reading into her paintings, which began in the 1920s and was revived by some feminists in the 1970s who took her work as a statement of female empowerment. Like Barson, we hope this cliched interpretation for both O'Keeffe and Mariel Farlow will be considered gendered and outdated. Part 3, the epilogue. Although the effort to relocate Farlow's sculpture ended in 1987, it really has never been out of popular culture. Mark Moran and Mark Skierman have created somewhat of a cottage industry with their series of Weird U.S. books and blogs. Farlow's sculpture was singled out by the authors in their Weird New York book. And of course, social media has been filled with mentions, posts, blogs, and comments about Farlow's sculpture ever since the beginning of social media. Each time an image of the sculpture appears on Facebook, for example, there are dozens of comments, many of which confirm the fact that this sculpture has been misinterpreted ever since it was placed. In October 2001, an episode of the popular situation comedy Everybody Loves Raymond followed a storyline loosely based on Farlow's sculpture. In Marie's sculpture, written by Jennifer Crittenden, Marie, Ray's mother, produces an abstract statue that makes most of the family uncomfortable. Marie, portrayed by Doris Roberts, wants to give the sculpture to the local nuns for a church auction. Some television critics consider Marie's sculpture, which originally aired on CBS on October 22, 2001, one of the show's best episodes, and TV Guide has rated it as the 42nd greatest sitcom episodes of all time. The episode's writer, Jennifer Crittenden, received a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Writing for a Comedy Series for writing this Marie's Sculpture episode. Phil Leventhal, who created Everybody Loves Raymond, grew up in New City. In an interview, Leventhal remarked that when Crittenden proposed the storyline, he was reminded of the controversy about the sculpture on the Rockland County Courthouse grounds. It's at this time that I'd like to share a reflection on the construction of Mariel Farlow's Being of Light by her daughter, Michelle Latis.
I was just 7 years old the summer my mother was working on the New City County Courthouse monument. At that young age, I was still in something of a dream world of my own, and also felt very interconnected with my mother and her activities. We had recently moved into a home with a spacious, sun-filled art studio where my mother spent a great deal of her time. While she worked on concepts for the courthouse project that preceding winter and spring, I was often in the studio with her, doing something creative as well, or outside playing with my canine companions. I have wonderful memories of us all being in that studio together, my mother, my 2 older sisters, and I, and a bunch of dogs acting as footrests, all enjoying the morning sun, laughing and chatting while my mother worked. I remember the model that was chosen. As an abstract form, it was interesting, and I appreciated its grace. Once my mother's work moved on-site to the county courthouse lawn, there was a great sense of excitement around the massive, to me, scale of this project. I was mystified at first why such a large pit had to be dug at the site, when the sculpture was such a tall shape that was supposed to tower up above the ground. Once the metal armature started to go up, it was exciting. I loved to come by to play on site, often visiting with my best friend Alexis, whose family frequently looked after me while my mother was working. Upon arriving, we'd circle the corner of the courthouse's grassy lawn to take in the progress. I can still see my mother, way up high on the scaffolding. She was beautiful, her sun-tanned arms so strong, hoisting and pouring as she layered up the concrete. To me, she seemed truly powerful, bending metal and concrete to her will. She'd wave and smile down at us, and we would clamber up the scaffolding, and then it felt like we too were high up in the sky, looking down from on top of the world. I could not fathom how those hard and solid materials would eventually convey the fluid elegance of her model. As it turned out, due to the interference of some authority which I could not understand, the sculpture's armature was truncated at the base just prior to arriving on site. I felt quite disappointed that it no longer matched the more elongated proportions of her approved model, which I had so admired in the studio. I remained, nevertheless, a fan of the project. Through it all, I felt proud of my mother and the outcome of her hard work, which seemed to me at the time to be an enormous achievement. As the school year began and I entered first grade, the work on the courthouse monument soon came to a close. Sometimes we would drive past the courthouse, and looking up at the Being of Light sculpture, my chest would swell with pride. Years later, I became aware of the controversy over the sculpture's appearance being compared to the female sexual anatomy. I was shocked and embarrassed that people would see it that way. As a child, that certainly had never crossed my mind. Later still, I came to be able to see why people might make that association. But I felt then, as I do now, that beauty and perception truly are in the eye of the beholder. As with a Rorschach-Blatt, interpretations and associations often reveal more about the viewer than the work. And from my point of view, there should be no shame in that. With all the countless monuments in the world that could be deemed phallic or resembling male anatomy, I see too few that carry any countervailing feminine quality. While it was definitely not my mother's intention or vision, I see nothing wrong with an abstracted work that evokes the feminine form, should people choose that interpretation. My mother made a monument that to her has a deep spiritual significance. If others take it as signifying female anatomy, I say, vive la différence. It is the work of a strong and creative woman. The work itself demonstrates structural resilience and integrity, and also grace and fluidity. As it happens, both my mother and her work have overcome obstacles, endured tribulations, and outlasted many critics. Now, on the 40th anniversary of the monument's construction, I am 47 years old, the very same age my mother was when she built it. I have a young daughter and a son of my own who also admire their grandmother's artwork. I remain proud of my mother and her being of light monument, which has well withstood the test of time. I continue to be inspired by her energy and her courage in the face of adversity, and I am thankful that she and her artwork are getting the recognition they so rightly deserve. Hopefully, the plaque with her name on it and the poem, which serves to illustrate her intentions, will also finally be installed.
As was mentioned in part one of this program, at the time of the unveiling of the sculpture in October 1980, Mariel Farlow had written a poem that was to be affixed to the base of the sculpture along with an artist's statement. Unfortunately, funding ran out before this was accomplished. 40 years later, we hope that we can help achieve Farlow's goal. Steps are being taken now to arrange for a plaque to be affixed to the base of Farlow's sculpture with the poem.
Well, that was quite a journey and a story from beginning to end. But it's not over yet. I would like to take it back a little before we have the audience participation. I think Claire and I have a couple of questions that we would like to ask both of you. Why don't you unmute yourselves, Michelle and Mariel? And then in a moment, we will unmute the rest, okay? So first of all, I have so many questions, some of which were answered and some I still would like to expound upon. But let's just wait one moment. There we go, I think. There we are. Okay, now we can hear you. So let's take it back a little bit to the beginning. When you got this grant, it's my understanding that part of the requirement with this grant was for, I guess, for an interaction with the public. That you had to have some form of that, and you got maybe more than you even anticipated. You know, having students help and then find an old friend, you know, from school. How did you feel about that? Was that part of your intent? Did you ever do that before, where you had the public so close to your process of creating your piece?
It was fun. It added to the joy of it, you know. The public came by rather all the time. And so that was a lot of fun and a lot of good conversation. I do want to thank you, Claire, for this wonderful coverage that you did. My goodness, that's quite a feat on your part. Digging up old memories, my goodness.
Well, I want to thank you for all the time you spent with me, and it's been such a great educational experience for me. So much fun throughout the whole last year and plus, you know, getting to know you and learning more about your process and about this interesting, the controversy that took place. So yeah. Pleasure.
So Claire, what inspired you to take up this story?
Well, it's interesting. I always admired that sculpture. And when I first visited it, there was no plaque or no name associated with it. And I just thought, I wonder what the story is with this. And so part of what I do for the Historical Society as a volunteer is I moderate their radio show, but I also do a weekly newspaper, like 100 years ago, this happened, 150 years ago, that happened. And I just thought, well, you know, maybe I'll just do some research in the ways that I normally research things for history. And I found out that the sculpture was in the Smithsonian's, you know, Book of Sculptures, because it had been part of this federal grant program. So that's how I found out Mariel's name. And then I started doing more research. And I just found that Mariel was still alive, that was thrilling to me. And I thought maybe we can find her and talk to her and and because I do this 100 years ago this week column every Friday, I do a lot of postings on social media, and I do a lot of e-blasts to all the history members. And every time something would come up about this sculpture, there would be dozens, if not hundreds, of responses about it. You know, and everybody, you know, talking about Ray Romano and Everybody Loves Raymond and all these different things. And I thought, you know what, let's get to the bottom of this. What does this sculpture really mean? What is the deal with this? Rather than have everybody like speculate and, you know, people are saying, oh, it was moved or it wasn't moved. So I thought, you know what, we got to, as a good history researcher, we wanted to find out what really happened. And then I was fortunate enough to find out how to reach Mariel, thanks to a wonderful lady over at the Threefold Community who helped us with a historical house tour of the Threefold community, connected me with Mariel, and then the rest is history. I mean, we just spent so much time together. So I was just fascinated. I studied art history. That's my field. And I love history, and so this was a perfect research project for me. And just thrilled that Mariel's been so cooperative and helpful throughout with this.
I was able to tell when I first met you, Claire, that your passion for this project and for Mariel's work was just so deep and so inspiring that you got me excited to get somehow involved, because I thought the injustice of it not having any recognition of who this artist was or is, and what the sculpture means, especially in light of the controversy.
Yeah.
So
I always felt like, as I've studied art history my whole life, the amount of women artists who are marginalized. Well, first of all, in 1980, for a 47-year-old woman to get a commission like this, and then to not put her name on it. I mean, and then, over the years, people nobody really knowing what the story was. I just thought this is such a typical story of a female artist, and so I just felt like we got to give this incredible artist her due. I mean, this has been there 40 years, and nobody knows the true story. I mean, a few people do, but not enough in my view. So to me, it was a very typical story of a woman artist, and it needed to be, it needs to be shared. That's just my view.
Now, Michelle, you were 7 years old, and your what you wrote or spoke about, how inspired and how proud of your mom you are at 7. Let's fast forward to 40 years later, still being proud of her. But what do you think about all this hoopla and this controversy now that you're an adult and you have children? What would you want them to be thinking as they grow up, over what occurred in this county as such a huge controversial issue right here at home?
It was interesting to have this whole project brought that conversation into the family, and we addressed it with them, and it was very interesting to hear their indignation, still being young, and just sort of just aghast that anybody would think that, and that that they actually tried to move grandma's sculpture. And I mean, I think it's really fascinating to them. And my perception, it's interesting, has definitely probably gone through some evolutions since my adulthood, prior to having children, and then now that I am a parent. And I do view things differently as a mother than I did before, of course, like we all do. But I'm just glad it's still there. I'm glad it didn't get moved or it didn't get taken down. And I'm so thankful to Claire and to you for giving my mom this opportunity to tell her story and to finally have it be publicly acknowledged what her intentions were. So it feels just, I don't know, really deeply satisfying. It's a really wonderful, I'm so happy that this is happening while she's alive and not posthumously. That sometimes happens with artists where they're not recognized for something until after they're already gone. And so, yeah, I'm just really proud and totally delighted.
Well, in spite of all of this, there is a program, and Claire, you alluded to it, and it was also in the video, the CETA Arts Alive program. So how does that affect this sculpture, whether we had this controversy, not had the controversy? I think that whatever you have to say about this becomes even a bigger deal and something that is amazing for women and for Mariel in particular. Could you explain a little bit more about that, program?
Sure. So the CETA Arts Alive program was a federally funded arts program that underwrote not only visual artists, but musicians, dancers, art administrators, and so many of the programs that we know about in Rockland County that still exist today, were funded, and a lot of the like human resources that still today support arts programs in Rockland County started with this funding. So whether it was, the Finkelstein Libraries programs, or ROCA, or Arts Council of Rockland, there are a lot of the dance troupes. But with regard to the art itself, the actual physical art projects that took place, those ended up in a catalog at the Smithsonian. So this sculpture will always be in the lexicon of, sculptures, public sculptures, regardless of what happens. And so, this is a very important piece, as we know, and there's fewer and fewer of these pieces left. So there's some murals that are trying to be refurbished. Part of the problem with publicly funded arts programs is that what they always fail to set money aside for is conservation and protection. So it's true with the WPA art as well. So many of these incredible WPA art, which of course that was from the 30s and 40s, those things are being lost to time because there really isn't funding set aside to conserve those things and to protect them and preserve them. So, what's great about this is that Mariel said it in her own words, I decided to pour it solid and there it stands, 40 years, not a repair, not a crack, nothing. So, but the good news is that there's always going to be a place for this, whether it's, so anyway, it's important, and it's one of the few pieces that remain. So in New York State, it's one of the few pieces that remain.
Yeah, that was a great decision that you made, Mariel, to make it solid, because there it is. And what are you doing today? What have you been doing for the last 40 years?
Oh, yes. Well, I work a lot in clay. That's what I've been doing. And still where I live now at the Fellowship community, there is a pottery. And so I have clay there. And I don't do the wheel, but I have done some pottery. And I do small figures. Mm-hmm. I have, let's see, I did a very large wall. Well, this goes back again, years. But a very large outdoor wall in Heckscher Park of Long Island. Mm-hmm. The Harry, what was his name? Well, anyhow, it was a big memorial and a lot of children helped. We did a great big, beautiful mosaic wall.
Martin Luther King.
No, that's another one. No, this is Harry Chapin. Oh. Harry Chapin, outdoor theater. And a great big, yeah.
And I understand that that you have work that's currently on view in the Clarksville Gallery. Is that correct?
Oh, a few pieces, yeah.
And then also,
we'll get some more there.
There's also an ongoing program of this at the Historical Society of Rockland. Is that right, Claire?
That's right. So this began as a what we call a mini exhibition as part of our semi-permanent exhibition called Rockland Voices. So every year we choose a different subject or piece of history that we add to that semi-permanent exhibition. So there's a small mini exhibition which includes a beautiful maquette of the sculpture, which is just exquisite. as well as a lot of the content of this program is also there. So if you want to see that beautiful maquette and, you know, read more from Mariel and see more of her, there's a catalog there with more of her, there's a little sort of a slideshow of some of her other work that is, you know, not this particular sculpture, but the other work that she did. Mariel, tell about what I find is very interesting is when you do that sculpture live. So for example, if someone's giving a lecture about Rudolf Steiner, you literally sculpt a bust of Rudolf Steiner as they're talking. Tell a little bit about how you do that.
Well, that's something I did a lot of, especially also at Jean Houston's mystery schools for several years. She would, we take up a subject, say Thomas Jefferson or Gandhi or Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan. So all these personages, while Jean Houston presented the program and made these people live in that way, I mean, by her giving all the information, I would model their bust very quickly. I even did this in many school library. Practically every library in Rockland County had me doing portrait demonstrations.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful.
It's something I did. Mm-hmm.
Why don't we open it up to the audience for some of their questions and comments so that they can help participate in this Zoom. So why don't we, if you have a question, why don't you identify yourself?
You can
unmute yourselves.
Yep, that's fine. Raise your hand if you want me to unmute you. It's totally fine.
Come on now, somebody's got to have some question, comment. To Michelle, to Mariel, to Claire.
Oh, I know it's something that came up before was just how important the Rafa family was to what you were doing there, and how
there's someone here from Nyack, I think, Vinny Rafa, who actually worked on.
Yeah.
I understand. And I think we have somebody in the audience who actually told me about that.
Oh yeah, Colleen, here we go. Colleen has a comment.
Hi. Hi, Mariel.
Hello, Colleen.
Yeah, I want to tell it. I don't know how to change myself. So I'm sorry about that. But I want everybody to know that Mariel, for quite a few years, came into my classroom and taught my students how to do the temperaments and portraits in clay. And all of the classes were working on their self-portraits in clay, and it came out so beautiful. The children come back, you know, I think they're in their 20s now, maybe late 20s, and they all remember that experience with Mariel. So I'm very grateful that I had that wonderful experience with Mariel and I got to work with her. And yes, Vinny Rafa, who's I guess in the audience because I can't see it, I'm on a phone. He also assisted Mariel with the sculpture, but I think he worked on the base. Maybe he wants to talk to you about that.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colleen.
Yes,
thank you.
I think Penny Peace has a comment.
Hi, Penny.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay, great. Mariel, thank you so much. It's wonderful to have met you 2 times now via the programs that Clare has produced. My question is about, in the midst of the controversy surrounding being of light, was there any support? Any organization, any women's group that spoke out in defense of you and your work?
Thank you for asking. There was quite a dialogue in some of the newspapers, and some people who I didn't even know wrote very nice letters of support.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I, let's see.
But was there any like arts organization that the Arts Council or
yes,
any art or organization throughout the country that might have come to your defense? Because this was
Harriet Cornell was very supportive, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my research really showed that there was individual support from fellow artists, but there wasn't an organized group the way there was for the Parents for Decency Through Law. Like that was a big group, but they really weren't interested in doing anything with the sculpture. They wanted kids not to be able to buy like Penthouse magazine and nude greeting cards. They weren't really, it was just this one fellow who sort of stirred up the pot for, wow, this is an issue that people latch onto, this decency issue. And, it's interesting that, 40 years later, you still see people seeing like, what can I score political points with an easy thing that people, get riled up around. It's sort of that way. And so, yeah, I mean, my research showed that there was a lot of support, but it was more individualized, fellow artists speaking out on their own, not any sort of coordinated support that I could find.
Claire, as an art historian, do you think that gender played any role in the controversy?
100%.
What if Mariel had been male?
Well, I think Michelle says it well in her reflection. I mean, our world is full of phallic sculpture. Nobody ever says, let's take that down. That just doesn't happen. There's just, it's like, so I, number one, I don't believe if it were a man that it would ever been put up without his name on it.
Right.
I just don't think that right there would never have happened in my experience. So, from the get-go, it was, it was, I feel it was marginalized, and Mariel was marginalized. Yeah.
So Mariel, what words of wisdom or inspiration can you give to other women artists, having gone through this whole 40-year kind of ordeal, but something to definitely be proud of and sort of groundbreaking? What would you say to them to inspire them to keep going and to keep fighting for recognition and so on in today's world?
Well, I think that it's more a matter of being true to the inspiration that one feels, and to be creative with that, and recognition. That just, I was content that it doesn't happen.
Well, I think, that brings me to say that I believe it is going to happen, and you're going to see it happen, certainly on the anniversary in October. I will tell you that Nyack ARTWALK and SuffrageForward would like to donate some funds towards the making of the plaque and the poetry, whatever is going to be on that sculpture of yours in New City. So we would like to make a nice contribution or donation to, is it to the Historical Society, Claire? Maybe we
Correct. Yes. So the Historical Society has kindly agreed to be our fiscal sponsor, if you will. And so if anyone is interested in helping make the plaque happen, all you have to do is visit rocklandhistory.org. You can donate online or you can send a check. Just make sure that you put in the memo, you know, the sculpture plaque, that's fine. And so they're going to put that money into a special account. And then when the plaque is is installed, we'll use those funds to underwrite that plaque and the installation. So thank you so much, Paulette. That's great.
You're welcome. And Michelle, what would you say as the daughter of this amazing artist and having gone through this whole process from 7 years old to today, what words of wisdom would you have?
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess just perseverance, really. You know, it's just it's a long road. There's no quick and easy. I think for women, that's true in many fields. It's just, you know, you just kind of don't give up and keep at it, you know, and hopefully it's I think social media and the opportunities that we have now for communicating projects like this and getting, you know, shining a light on women's work and projects, I think is really a big step forward, but I think that it continues to be an uphill battle.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It will continue. It's since the beginning of time all the way through and then some. We have time for maybe one more question or comment. Is there anyone in the audience that has something to say or ask?
Was Vinny gonna say something?
I don't know. I don't know where.
Vinny Raffle?
Yeah, Vinny, are you around? Are you there?
I don't
there, and maybe he
reach him.
I don't
and thank him again.
Jumped off. I don't see him anymore. He might have had to leave.
Okay. Yeah. So if nobody has anything else to say, I guess that will conclude our program. And I want to thank all of you for joining us this evening, those of you in the audience, and thank you, Claire, for putting this together. It was an amazing, informative, and entertaining video and program. And Michelle, thank you for participating in this and your wonderful recounting of your memories in your childhood, of your mom and the whole process. And Mariel, what can I say? Thank you so much for being so talented and for creating this beautiful sculpture that will be there forever and continue working. I also would like to thank ARTWALK as Nyack ARTWALK's fiscal sponsor, and Rockland Community Foundation, which is the fiscal sponsor of SuffrageForward, along with thanks to Rockland County Tourism for their support, and the Historical Society for allowing us to work with this program as well. For all of you, just so you know, we're all volunteer nonprofits and welcome, of course, any tax-deductible donations. And thank you for your support throughout the year so that we can continue to bring you informative and entertaining programs such as this. You can follow all of our organizations on our Facebook pages, Instagram, and feel free to contact us if you have any other questions. Join us, though, please, next Thursday for our second collaborative event, Nyack ARTWALK and SuffrageForward, where we will have Uncensored with Miss Penny Peace, who is still part of the audience here. I promise you, if you love art, man, this is just going to entertain you and be just so informative. I know because I've gotten some sneak peeks. So please join us at 7 o'clock next Thursday. So again, thank you, audience, and thank you to our participants, Claire, Michelle, and Mariel. And I guess on that note, I have to say good night.
Good night, and thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
And we'll see you in October.